Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockers Club. We've got a cool motherboard here from MSI. So today we've got the MPG Z890I EDGE TI Wi-Fi. This is a mini ITX, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a very, very small motherboard. It's about 6.7 inches square. You don't see these as often as you do your micro ATX and your full-size ATX and sometimes your extended ATX. But these are really nice if you're doing a small form factor build in a really tiny little case. And I actually have a tiny little case that we'll be doing a little system build in so we can see what this thing looks like in it. Now if you don't know anything, or I guess if you know anything about MSI, they've got three levels or three tiers. They've got MAG, MPG, which is what this one is, and then there's the MEG, which is the enthusiast level. Those are the high-end boards like this Z890 Ace here from MSI. You can see it upside down. It's MEG right there. But within the three levels, you've got three tiers of feature sets and price points. So your MAG is more like your entry-level board with a modest amount of features. The MPG is the mid-range, and the pricing is reflected there also in your feature set, somewhere in between your MAG and your MEG. Of course, the MEG is the king of the hill, and of course the pricing reflects that. And just because a motherboard manufacturer makes a mini ITX in one series doesn't mean they cover all series with that. So for example, there may not be an MAG mini ITX or an MEG mini ITX. We may only find one here in the MPG range because these are not as popular and as common, so you're not going to necessarily find them across all your different levels. And on a mini ITX, there are a lot of design challenges because, as you can see, there is not a lot of real estate to stuff everything into. So there are limitations on some of the features and the expansion capabilities on a mini ITX board. And there's some weird glare going on there, so let me tilt the box up. There we go, so now you can see. So the feature set shows here direct 10 phases, power design, premium thermal design, easy M.2 shield Frozer 2, quadruple M.2 connectors, Lightning Gen 5, Thunderbolt 4, Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.4, and 5 gig LAN. That's impressive. And some of this stuff is really small. Let me see if I can zoom in. That's a little better there. You can see the I/O panel. And we'll get this out of the box. You can see it. And it'll look a little nicer than the illustrations. But here's some of the feature sets here. Or features, I should say. We've got the standard LGA 1851 to handle the latest Intel CPUs. We've got 2 slots for memory. There's some expander stuff going on there, and I'll show you that again. Since this is a mini ITX, you've got some limitations. Okay, so let's look at some of the goodies here. We got that looks like an RGB connector cable there for RGB effects. There's a little expansion board. I'll get this out and we'll look at it in more detail here in a little bit. There's your Wi-Fi antenna, and they give you a little USB drive with all your drivers on them. And let's see what's in here. More cables. We've got some SATA connectors, SATA cables, and some more cables here. I'll have to see exactly what these are a little later. And then the motherboard itself, I think that's, there's some more stuff on the bottom. Some more documentation. But the motherboard itself, again, is pretty small when you're used to looking at full-size ATX boards. And let's go ahead and get this out of the protective packaging. And again, this is about 6.7 by 6.7 inches. And like I said earlier, you know, when you've got a limited amount of real estate, you have to get creative on how you lay out all of the different features. For example, you know, you've only got one PCIe slot on a board this size. We've got 2 slots for memory. This is a special connector for the expansion card, and I'll show that again here in just a little bit. The heat sink, again, you don't have a whole lot of room, so your heat sinks here for the VRM, they are fairly small. Now the I/O panel here, let me zoom in there and get it centered. That's pretty good right there. All right, so we've got an onboard HDMI port. We've got 2 of your Thunderbolt ports here. We've got, looks like 6 plus 1 USB ports. We've got another USB-C port down here. These are your antenna connections for your Wi-Fi. This is your optical out microphone. Here is your 5G Ethernet connection. Then we've got a little BIOS button, a CMOS, and a smart button, and I'll talk about what those do a little later. If we look at the back of the board, now sometimes, yeah, there's actually a spot for one M.2 drive, and having space reserved on the back of a motherboard for a solid state drive is not new. That's been done for a while, but it's especially important, like I said, when you've got limited space. So let's see, I guess we need to look at, and I'll post the specs for the board here in a little bit too, but I need to look at what's going on here. Okay, so let's take a little closer look at some of the storage options here. Now if you just look at the motherboard, you don't see the usual spaces for an M.2 drive or any SATA ports for that matter, but they have all that covered. And like I said, when you've got this much space to work with, you've got to get pretty creative on these mini ITX boards. So the solid state drives are actually underneath here, and there's one spot for one on the back, and then there's a little bonus here. I'll show you that here in a little bit. This is the expansion card. It gives you one more SSD, solid state drive, M.2, whatever you want to call it. So there are a total of 4 on this motherboard and 2 SATA ports. That again we'll see here in just a moment. So if we take this off, this is a large aluminum heatsink. You push here on the side, you can sort of hear it click a little bit. But you push that in, you rotate it up a little bit, and then you pull it there to the right, and this entire heatsink comes off. Now this does have a thermal pad on it. You have to peel off the little protective cover when you are ready to use it. And when you peel it off, be careful not to take the thermal pad with it. You just want to get the little clear plastic off that exposes the thermal pad to make sure that all the heat gets transferred from your SSD to the heatsink. And it just sort of sticks on there. You can see it's easy to pull off with it. So you want to be careful there. So anyway, this is the heatsink for the top SSD. And this one, by the way, is your PCIe Gen 5 spot. It's the only one on the board. All the others are Gen 4. You can see it has the big chrome socket there on top. Now underneath this, and I took the 2 screws out. There's one here and there's one back here in the corner. I already took those out. But underneath here is another SSD. So you, after you get the screws out, you wiggle this back and forth a little bit as you pull up carefully, and you'll feel the 2 sockets disengage. There's a socket here on this side, and there's a socket here. These are what transfer all of your data back and forth between this board and the motherboard. So this is the circuit board that has your Gen 5 on top, SSD. There's another one on the bottom that is a Gen 4. So if you put an SSD in here, what is interesting is the heatsink is on the bottom, And it also has the same little clear plastic cover that you want to pull back when you put your SSD in there, so that you can transfer all the heat to this big aluminum heat sink here. But this heat sink serves two purposes. And normally, you would never have a reason to take this heat sink off, but I'm going to do it just to show you what's underneath. Like I said, normally you would never have a reason to do this. So I'll get all these screws out. All right, there are only 4 screws that hold this on there. And then you can see there's a little thermal pad there. That is for the chipset. You want to be really careful. You don't want to touch the top of that. You want to keep that absolutely clean. Don't want your fingerprints all over it, or any contamination that would impede the thermal transfer to the heatsink, because that chipset can get very hot. So this serves two purposes. It works for the SSD that's on top and the chipset that's underneath. So I will get this back on there. And I know I said it a couple of times already. I'll say it one more time. Ordinarily, there's no reason for you to ever take that off, so you can just leave it on there. Okay, all right, so I got that heatsink back on there. And the first two positions again for your SSDs, they're both attached to this. Again, this is your PCIe Gen 5 on top. On the bottom there's a Gen 4, so that's 2 SSDs. We've got one on the back of the motherboard. This is a Gen 4. And then there is one more bonus that is on the expansion card here. So we've got a lot going on this little card. First, let me show you on the motherboard, the actual slot, which is right next to your memory slots there, your DIMM slots. It's got a sticker over that you need to remove first, but it says supports the installation of MSI 5-in-1 expander card only. So they want to make sure that you don't try to stick anything else in there, because this is designed specifically for that slot. Okay, so on here, if we look at the top, there are your 2 SATA ports, which we usually see on the motherboard, but they're on the expansion card here. We've got one USB-C. We've got another USB, if I can stay in focus there, another USB connector. We've got a little RGB connector there. Like I said, there's a lot going on here. And if we flip it over, we've got one more SSD position. That's a Gen 4. Now, there is one little odd thing about this position. If you put an SSD there, you have to use a single-sided SSD. So this, for example, is a double-sided SSD. Underneath the sticker here, there are chips, so you can call it the top of the SSD. And on the back, it has a couple of chips also, plus some other stuff going on there. So it is not flat or smooth on the back. So this is a double-sided SSD. You can't use it in this spot per the manufacturer's recommendations. This is a single-sided SSD. If you look on the back here, it is smooth and flat. There's nothing connected to the back of it. And I think the reason they do that is for clearance. You don't want, let's see if this goes in. I should probably take that little sticker off now. And let's see which way the little expansion board goes on there. So the slot is, okay, so the slot is like that, so it goes in this way, which means that the SSD that you would put on there, just pop that in, there we go, is going to be facing your memory modules, so anything sticking out on the back, you got to be careful. That's probably why they do that, just because the clearance is limited. And if you put an SSD on the back here, just make sure that you put the screws back in. So you line up your sockets and you can sort of feel the sweet spot where they're lined up, and they just pop in. But like I said, don't forget your screws. Okay, so now we'll take a look at some of the connections and connectors and headers and all that good stuff around the board. We'll start here at the lower left. This is your audio header, audio connector. Down here, and there are a couple places on the board. There's some up here I'll show in a moment. They're not referenced in the user manual, and I think these are used during testing and setup during the manufacture of the motherboard. So the manufacturer would use these, and there's nothing you would ever do with them on your own. So we'll move up to this little board here, and I think I talked about this earlier, but here's another fan header. This is sysfan 1. USB header. This is RGB. This is an easy connector. It's a little special cable that comes with the motherboard, and it plugs in to the little header. And what this does, again, given the small footprint that this has and the space restrictions, it gives you 3 little additional connectors here. So we've got an additional RGB connector, we've got a USB connector, and we've got an additional fan header. So that gives you a little more room as I drop the little cap. And moving down here to the bottom right, down here this is a TPM header, Trusted Platform module, a hardware module. So there's a little module you can buy. They're $15, $20, $25 for your Trusted Platform. And I'm not entirely sure why this is here, because with the latest generation of CPUs, I think that's embedded into the firmware. It's part of the Windows security system for Windows 10, Windows 11. So I'm not 100% sure where you would really need to use that, but we'll see if anything is required when I get the operating system installed. It will certainly let me know. Windows will, I should say. Okay, so this little connector here, this is for your front panel, your start button, reset button, hard drive activity light, all that. And it's a little hard to get to. It's kind of up in the corner. So what they do, if I can find the right cable here, they include this little cable, which has the connector that goes on the motherboard. So we'll just go ahead and plug that in. Let's see, so that goes like, make sure I get it plugged in there right. Yeah, it goes on there like that. And then what it does is it basically takes the pins that are on the motherboard and extends them out here where they're real easy to get to. So this is where you plug in your, like I said, your hard drive activity light, start button, reset button, all of that goes on there. So it just makes it a little easier to access. Let me pull that off of there. I should probably just leave it plugged in. I'm going to be using it here in a little bit anyway. Let's move up to the side here, and I think I misidentified this on the expansion card earlier. I think I called this RGB. This is not. This is actually for like a speaker, those little system speakers. I don't know who really uses those anymore, but that is what those are. If we look up here at the upper right, I believe we've got some more connectors that are not really referenced in the manual, so I'm not sure what they do. Got your usual 24-pin ATX power supply connector, and then your CPU power is up here at the top. Actually, let me flip the board all the way around here. So here we've got a pump header and a CPU fan header. Over here we've got a thermal sensor. You've got one of those on here, so you can connect one of those little thermistors here and measure temperature. Then we've got a chassis intrusion connection if you want to use that on your case. And then over here we've got some more connectors like we had at the other side of the motherboard. They're not referenced in the manual. Again, I think these are for part of the debugging process when the board is manufactured. And the thermal sensor that I was just talking about a moment ago up at the upper left-hand corner of the motherboard, right up in here. I don't think that's included. I didn't see the cable in the box, so I'm pretty sure that's something you have to purchase separately if you want to. And they're usually not very expensive, $8, $10, somewhere around there, I think. And you might even get like a 5-pack of them. They're not terribly expensive. And the other thing, while I've got the manual up here, here's the TPM module connector, like I was showing earlier, which is down here at the bottom right, and here in the manual it sort of shows it again right there in the bottom. And it does say that the module is not included and must be purchased separately. Again, I'm not 100% sure. That's a little bit vague. It says it's not included, but do I absolutely have to have it? It doesn't really tell you, so we'll figure that out. Time for a real quick side note here. I've got this case here from Height. Actually, pretty dusty since it's been sitting in the corner of it. It comes in its own Pelican case. This was like a very limited edition. But this would be the perfect case for a mini ITX build. In fact, this is the Revolt 3 Premium ITX case, so I think this will be a lot of fun. Okay, so I always leave the little cover on until the very moment that I'm ready to install the CPU. I always do a quick inspection of the pins to make sure there aren't any that are bent or damaged. And when you're ready to drop the CPU in, always match the little triangle there in the corner with the triangle that is up here on top of the retainer. Pull the retainer back and very carefully drop it in. All right, now we are ready to go. For the cooler, I'll be using the MAG Core Liquid C280 from MSI. Graphics card is a Vanguard 5080, also from MSI. And the cooler here, being a 280, is just the right size to fit in the little mini ITX case from Height that we'll be showing a little later. Okay, I am ready for the system build. Got the side panel off here on this nice mini ITX case from Height. I had to go back to the web page for the case. This is the Revolt 3. I'll refamiliarize myself with the specifications because I wanted to make sure, 280 millimeter radiator. That's what I plan on putting in there. And since this is such a small case, I want to make sure it'll fit. I have to watch the graphics card too. There's some limitations with a case this size. So I will get this started. So one of the challenges here is I sort of do a quick test fit for the motherboard. With a mini ITX case is thinking it through and planning how you're going to get everything connected, because you don't want to get halfway into it and realize you've got to start pulling things back out because you can't get to a cable or a connector that you forgot to plug in. So this will handle a 280 millimeter radiator, and it mounts to this swinging bracket here, but it'll be very tight. The graphics card, you can see down in that rectangular slotted area, I'm limited to what appears to be a 3-slot card and nothing really any wider than 3 at all. But the other limitation here is the included power supply that is back here only has these connectors, so I need to double check the wattage, the output of that power supply, and see what my limitations are. But obviously I'm not going to be putting any 4090 in here, or 4080, 5090, 5080, with the restraints not only on space but the power supply. And when I go back to the Height website here, they have the GPU compatibility. The ones that have been tested, that doesn't mean these are the only ones. But you can see here, we don't have any in the 40 series at all. We've got some 30 series. We've got some AMD cards in there also. They do show you incompatible ones, so that's nice that they've tested those and they know that those will not fit. But again, the other restriction is the power supply. It comes with a 700 watt unit. And unless you can stuff something else in there, and I'm not saying you can't, but it would have to be a pretty small, low-profile power supply if you were trying to upgrade. And then the bigger picture, even still, is the limitation of airflow through there, because being a very small case, everything's packed tightly. It can get awful warm in there in a hurry if you try to overload the case or pack it with more stuff than it was really designed to handle. So as you can imagine, there's not a lot of space here to work. This was actually one of the more difficult system builds I've done. I was able to get a 4060 Ti in there. It's kind of hard to see with all the cables and hoses. You can sort of see the fan there is obscured a little bit, actually quite a bit, but the other fan on this side, whoop, a little hard to see down in there, but that fan is open. Should get plenty of airflow. This is within the wattage capabilities of the power supply, so I think we're okay there. I did have to change the cooler here. I had an MSI 280 millimeter system, and I was just afraid when I tried to close this and button everything up, I was going to break something. It's just that the hoses are much thicker, much larger on a 280 compared to this 240. So I've got this 240 millimeter system here from Cooler Master, and it is the Master Liquid PL240 Flux. And even though it is a smaller system, it's going to be tight. So let me see if I can get this all buttoned up. Okay, so I had to change directions. There was no way I could get the motherboard into that case, that small mini ITX case, with any kind of a liquid cooler that I currently have. The one that I had originally used that had smaller diameter, more flexible lines. I don't have that cooler anymore, so there was just no way I could make that work. So what I've got now is this Be Quiet Light Base 900DX. The DX comes with no fans. The FX comes with fans. It's available in black or white. I borrowed those fans there from another Be Quiet cooler. I didn't have any more white fans to put in here, so the fans at the top there are part of a 420 millimeter Silent Loop 3 radiator. So this case will handle a 420 millimeter radiator at the top and the bottom, but not on the side. We can only go up to 360. So anyway, the motherboard looks really nice in here, even though it is overkill for a motherboard this small for a mini ITX form factor. This case will handle a much, much larger motherboard. But it does look pretty nice in here. Now I've got the side glass off because of the glare and the reflections. Okay, let's take a quick look at the MSI center here. One of the things you've got for overclocking and system performance, we've got some canned profiles. So you've got extreme performance, balanced, and silent, which pretty much slows things down so that you don't generate a lot of heat, and then you don't need to run the fans, so that keeps things quiet. So it depends on the number of fans in your system too. On Customize, you can go in and you can adjust all of these settings. And again, I'll talk about this a little more in the next BIOS screens. But if you're not comfortable with what's going on here, probably leave it alone and stick with the canned profiles for your performance. The extreme performance does kick things up a notch. You will generate a little more heat depending upon the CPU. Your performance, of course, will vary. And here we have the BIOS. It's really easy to navigate. You've got easy mode and you've got advanced. Here's the overclocking. You've got a lot of options here for overclocking. A lot of them are not defined real well, so if you don't have a good understanding of what's going on, and there's a lot going on, you're probably better off, if you're not comfortable, pretty much leaving it at the stock settings. Over here on the main screen now, I highly recommend making sure that your memory, if you've got XMP available, which most memory does, make sure the XMP is enabled. Some memory has XMP 1, 2, and even 3. And again, you can see here we've got some performance presets. Looks like there are 4. So you can sort of play around here and see which one gives you the most performance bang for the buck. Over here we've got the Intel 200S Boost. You can enable that. So let's see. Profile allows you to increase performance in some applications without voiding the warranty. It looks like that's done through Intel, so it is a nice way to get some performance. And you can always Google Intel 200S, and you can see it takes you to the Intel site, and it kind of walks through what it is, what it does. Let's see, you've got to have the appropriate Intel XMP memory modules. And these are the settings, and it does show, now I don't know how up to date it is, but it does talk about what motherboards are covered. Now I do have a Z890 Ace. This doesn't show the current motherboard that we're looking at today, but it does have this available in the BIOS, so maybe they've added the motherboard, but it hasn't made it to the website here to be included. Well, I say beast, these are actually the Renegade DDR5 CU DIMMs, the latest from Kingston. And these do have the option to go from XMP1 to XMP2, so you can play around with both of those settings if you've got this type of memory and see how much difference in performance that makes. And let's see, there's just a ton of stuff you can do. If you look over here on the right side and click the gear, you can get into the details here if you want to look at what's going on with your CPU and your memory. Let's see, here's some more information. Oh, we just looked at that. Okay. I'll keep going. Here's your storage information, what drives you've got plugged in. Fan profile, you can look at speeds and temperatures. You can change your fan curves through the BIOS here. And again, if you go into the advanced, you've got a lot more options to choose from under all of these categories here. So there's just a lot that you can spend some time on learning and understanding. So I always like to get comfortable and familiar with the BIOS anytime I get a new motherboard. But I think we are done here. Well, actually at the top here. So this little icon is when you want to update your BIOS. Hardware monitor, it takes you back to your fan curves. Profiles, you can make adjustments and then save them under different profiles. Makes it easy to go back and forth. Smart button, here you can change what the button on your I/O panel does, or the reset button on your case. You've got a couple of options for what that button actually does. A safe boot, LED on off, and then the standard reset. Got favorites and a BIOS log, so if you want to look and see what you just did, you can see we changed the XMP profile. And that's about it. And we'll do a little PCIe Gen 5 testing with this brand new Renegade G5 from Kingston. This is a PCIe Gen 5 model, which should run at some pretty high speeds. It looks like up to 14,700 megabytes a second. We've got it right here behind this heatsink, which is your PCIe Gen 5 slot, and we're running 12.2 to 12.8 between our read and write, so we're a little bit slower, but it does say up to, so there are a lot of variables in there that factor in. But one of the good things is we are keeping the temperature here pretty reasonable. We're running at 42 degrees Celsius. And I ran the test a couple more times. You can see the write speeds improved a little bit. I didn't make any changes or anything. I just reran the test, so you get some normal variation in there. And memory testing, there's the pass mark, some of the numbers for that. I just started using this, so I don't have anything to compare it to. And then here's the ATA64 memory test, and these numbers all look pretty good given the speed of the memory that I'm using. Okay, so I'm doing some overclocking here. This is a mild overclock. We're about 5.4 gigahertz, holding at 68C. It does drift up to around 70C. Your room temperature, of course, will affect that. I haven't had any issues with overclocking. I don't like to go too hardcore because you can run into some stability issues. but I generally try to stay in the middle of the road. So here's the system specs. The CPU is the Ultra 9 285K, and the cooler, this is a Be Quiet 420 millimeter silent loop 3 large 140 millimeter fans that really help keep the CPU cool. And of course, gaming with a motherboard like this, you should have no problems, especially when you team it up with a CPU and a graphics card like this. Now this is the Asus RTX 5070. It'll pretty much chew through most of your games without too many problems, depending upon where you keep your settings. Cheapest I've seen this is around $432 on Amazon. Chunk of money for a motherboard. You can certainly get less expensive motherboards that are capable, but this kind of fills in a niche for a very small form factor, the Mini ITX. So if you're trying to do a system build like that, there aren't many people making a motherboard in this particular form factor, so you have to keep that in mind. So given the feature set, functionality, and the unusual form factor, I really like this motherboard. It's really got a lot going on. So I would definitely give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.